Hi, I'm Hebblewhite, CEO of Atmo Biosciences. Atmo is a clinical stage digital health business focused on empowering researchers, clinicians, and patients with objective real-time insights into gut health and microbiome function. We address the unmet clinical need to monitor microbiome function, allowing better diagnosis and management of personalised therapies for gastrointestinal disorders, and this will result in improved gut health and wellness. We're underpinned by a world-first ingestible gas sensing capsule and cloud platform. It's not just an idea. We've evaluated the capsule in multiple clinical trials and administered it to more than 200 subjects to date. The capsule continuously monitors clinically important gaseous biomarkers during transit through the gut, and it transmits the data wirelessly to the cloud via a small handheld receiver. The intellectual property was developed over about 10 years at RMIT University and Alfred Health before I spun the technology out and raised some seed capital a couple of years ago to commercialise the device. We're commercialising a first diagnostic test for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but as you can imagine, the technology has multiple applications. So the concept started with inventors asking, what if assessing gastrointestinal health was as simple as taking a pill? And that's exactly what we have. Atmo's gas monitoring capsule provides the only currently available option to assess the entire functional health of a patient's gut and their microbiome. And that's going to result in better diagnosis, more appropriate and more personalised interventions and therapies, and ultimately improved health outcomes and reduced healthcare costs. So why is this important? Well, as you well know, 1 in 5 of us will suffer from a GI disorder that requires specialist attention at some point in our lives. And 1/3 of those patients with a condition have unresolved symptoms or do not receive a diagnosis. To give you some idea of the size of these problems, irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, is the largest chronic condition which is treated in the US. There's been a recent explosion of interest in the microbiome and its role in a range of different conditions, ranging from diabetes and obesity through to neurological health and mental health conditions. And there are multiple emerging businesses that are focusing on measuring microbiome composition through things such as stool sampling and sequencing. But directly measuring microbiome function remains a major unmet clinical need. And this is necessary for a personalised approach to GI indications and wellness, which requires a strong understanding of individual intestinal physiology and microbiome functional profile. Current approaches have only limited sensitivity and specificity, and the clinical need remains to understand microbiome function. Functional gastrointestinal disorders, or FGIDs, functional gut disorders, require functional measurements. Functional gut disorders are disorders of function, not structural or biochemical abnormalities. And as a result, conventional test methods generally can show essentially normal results. The 2 most common functional gut disorders are irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, and functional dyspepsia. And the typical symptoms are quite debilitating and result in reduced productivity and reduced quality of life. And 2 of the key ways that normal function of the gut is altered in functional gut disorders are changes to gut movement and motility and changes to the gut microbiome, both of which the Atmo capsule can measure. Different gases produced in the gut are valuable biomarkers for functional gut disorders. Oxygen varies with motility and transit time. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen and methane are important in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and irritable bowel syndrome. And we can measure these gases directly at the source of production in real time and transmit the information to the cloud for diagnosis. So how does the technology work? The Atmo capsule is an ingestible, disposable or consumable capsule. You do not retrieve it. After ingestion, it travels through the entire GI system and is expelled with a bowel movement. On the way, it continuously measures multiple gases: hydrogen, most importantly, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. And it transmits this information in real time to the cloud after measuring it directly at the source of production. It monitors location and transit time through these gases and through other sense capabilities, and it provides insights into gastrointestinal health or dysfunction. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, is highly prevalent in both the general population and in patients with functional gut disorders. Estimates have it at anywhere between 5 and 15% in the general population, and higher prevalences in other functional gut disorder conditions. And many of these symptoms that patients experience reduce when their SIBO is addressed. And our first commercial application will be in diagnosing SIBO. Why are we doing this? Well, SIBO diagnosis is currently inadequate. The approaches that are used vary from aspirate and culture to hydrogen-based breath testing and trial and error through empirical treatment. If you look at something as widespread as a hydrogen breath test, the sensitivity and specificity is very poor. But despite that, hundreds of thousands of breath tests are done each year to try to detect small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And when you consider that the Atmo capsule is measuring gases directly at the source of production, and it's doing that through a percent concentration measure, or parts per 100, and you compare that to a breath test, which is measuring gases indirectly because they have to be absorbed through the gut into the bloodstream and then exhaled through the breath and measured in parts per million, you can see why this is such an exciting technology in terms of getting a direct measure of gastrointestinal and microbial function. Aspirate and culture has its own drawbacks. It is held up as a gold standard, but due to variations in protocol, risk of contamination on the way out, and the fact that you're only measuring in one location at one point in time makes it a substandard process. So in summary, the key benefits of Atmo are that we're sensing directly at the source of gas production within the gut. We're more accurate than current methods. We're able to aggregate the data using wireless technology by collecting it and analysing it in the cloud, and in doing so, developing a large normative data set and a data set that includes patients with dysfunction or dysbiosis. It's lower cost than other methods, particularly when you consider that patients can go about their normal daily lives after ingesting the capsule and receive a diagnosis after the data are collected, stored and analysed in the cloud. It's small, it's the size of a large vitamin pill and is the same size as many other camera capsules that are currently on the market. The real-time data collection, machine learning and artificial intelligence can be overlaid on the data set to provide additional insight into microbiome function. And there are future opportunities and potential applications that span everything from food malabsorption and carbohydrate malabsorption to inflammatory disease and IBS. Thank you for your time, and if you'd like to learn more, my email address and phone number are on the screen and I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Malcolm, thank you so much. That was such a fascinating presentation. I have so many questions, so I'll only choose a handful to start up with. First and foremost, what made you decide to spin out from RMIT and continue the study on the pill?
Well, I found it pretty exciting because it is so unique, and also the fact that it is addressing unmet clinical needs in what are enormous problems in terms of the patients affected, and the fact that this technology is uniquely suited to it to be able to make a difference in quality of life for those people that are affected by these debilitating conditions.
And you were saying they are not reusable, which I'm relieved about hearing. Are they environmentally friendly?
So like all of the other capsules that are on the market currently, and a lot of them are, for example, camera capsules, they are disposable or consumable. Our capsule is powered by silver oxide batteries, which are more environmentally friendly than some other alternatives like lithium. But the sewage system is ably capable of dealing with objects like this. And if you really wanted to, you could tear it down and recycle various components. But currently, it's dealt with by the sewage system.
You mentioned a camera. Is there a possibility for evolving this and having a camera implanted and maybe having the pill implanted for stationary observation, perhaps?
Look, there is, but given the early stage, we really want to concentrate on what we can do well. And the fact is that we don't actually need a camera, because the sense capabilities that we have in here currently give us the position of the capsule as it transits through each section of the gut, transitioning from one organ to the next, from stomach to small intestine and small intestine to large intestine. So given that there are other alternatives that do use a camera for visual inspection, we don't believe that we need one. And the other thing is that with camera capsules, you have to be prepped and cleaned out. Whereas with this, it's actually monitoring what the microbiota are doing with food substrate and the gases that they're producing, which is different information and quite useful information clinically.
Right. Do any of them fail? Do you have a failure rate?
They do fail, just like almost every device, but fortunately the failure rate is very low. So again, in the case of other capsules, the failure rate is certainly in the very low percentages, if not less than 1%. And our experience with our capsule has been very favourable in that we've administered more than 200 of them, and we have not yet had an adverse event.
Right. Okay. That's great. Do some people have faster travel times? I know that's a really odd question, but if you took it and I took it at the same time, what would be the expected output?
No, it's not an odd question at all. In fact, that is our initial indication, is motility and transit time. And we have the ability, as I said, to be able to detect where the capsule is. And that is clinically useful to understand more about whether someone has slow or rapid transit. And what would be considered normal would be anywhere from 18 to, say, 36 hours. But of course, everyone's different. And even within an individual, the transit time may vary depending on things like diet or state of health or other factors. Generally, women tend to be longer than men. And as you age, your transit time is generally going to increase.
That doesn't work in my favour, does it? So some people can have faster metabolisms. That's actually a thing.
Certainly. Yeah, right. Absolutely. And this is the kind of tool that could be used to evaluate that.
Great. Now, I noticed that when you take the pill, you were saying that it connects to the device that you've got here on the table and a smartphone app. How secure is all of the communication?
So the system is developed to satisfy all of the privacy and data security regulations, not just here in Australia, but around the world, that are required these days, things like HIPAA, because data security and privacy are very important. So the system is developed to that level. The information is transmitted from the capsule to a small handheld receiver like that one, and then from there connects to mobile phone and is sent to the cloud wirelessly. There's a smartphone app which displays the temperature, so that when the capsule is excreted via a bowel movement, the temperature drops, and that's shown on the smartphone app, so that the patient or the subject knows that the capsule has been expelled. There's also symptom tracking, bowel movement log, to provide additional information to aid the diagnosis. And in particular, with clinical trials, like the range of trials that we have going on at the moment, to collect additional information which enhances the quality of the outputs.
So it's a one-to-one-to-one relationship whilst the pill is in transit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, right. It's quite cool. So what's the user experience like from the clinician or the trial coordinator point of view?
So after the clinician has administered the capsule to the patient or the clinical trial subject, they are able to log into a web-based portal to view the results and the report after analysis, after the capsule has been expelled and the analysis has taken place.
And on the patient's journey, how many times between initial diagnosis and maybe checking back in to see if the therapeutic treatment had been working, how many times would you estimate they would need to take a pill?
So look, it depends on the application and what the patient's issue might be. So, in a situation where they're looking at motility and transit time, for instance, they might just take one to understand that they have, for example, rapid transit or accelerated transit or slow for that matter. Whereas with a chronic condition like irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory disease, if it was ulcerative colitis, for instance, you could imagine this being used as a tool to monitor and manage the condition. The same goes in a situation where you're perhaps investigating food intolerance or carbohydrate malabsorption. You might want to take a series of capsules with different substrates to understand what exactly the cause of the problem might be. And then, in future years, you can absolutely imagine this becoming an over-the-counter product for consumer health applications, where a consumer might purchase, a number of them, establish a baseline in terms of their gut health and their microbiome function, and then use it to evaluate different dietary therapies, whether it's a low FODMAP diet or a particular strain of yogurt, for instance, to determine what sort of effect that is or is not having on not just their gut health, but also on their symptoms. And one of the reasons for having something like the smartphone app and the symptom logger is to be able to tie those symptoms into the results from the capsule, because it makes the data set that much more robust and you can get that much more insight from it.
Which does bring me to my next question. What is on the roadmap for you next? It seems like the world is your oyster.
So it is exciting times. We have a range of clinical trials at pilot stage underway now in Melbourne, in New Zealand, in Sweden, in Brisbane. We are looking to raise a Series A round right now in order to fund a pivotal trial for an initial indication, which is motility and transit time, and also for a subsequent indication in small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, as I mentioned earlier. So we're very busy and we're running very fast, and we've made a lot of progress over the course of the last couple of years, and I expect that to continue over future years.
So I'm sure there's a lot of R&D that's gone into this one tiny pill. How many iterations of the pill have you gone through to get to this stage?
Look, there have been quite a few iterations. If you consider where the technology came from in the university in its initial stages, it actually began life in livestock applications, in animal health, because methane mitigation in ruminants was an area of interest, and it evolved from there into the human applications. So there have been numerous iterations of the technology. It's shrunk to the point where a human could ingest it, and there's been a lot of R&D effort and development effort go into producing a device that is robust and safe and satisfies all of the standards and requirements that are required for a medical device. So it was under development for about 10 years at RMIT and with the assistance of Alfred Health. And it's been 3 years since we licensed the intellectual property and brought it out of there. And we've conducted several iterations of the capsule to reach this final generation now.
So I'm sure throughout your clinical trial, you've come across some incredible stories. What's the patient experience like?
Look, the patient response that we've had, whether it's through the clinical trials or just web inquiries or email inquiries, has been overwhelming, because there's a huge number of people out there who are suffering from really debilitating conditions like irritable bowel syndrome that impact their quality of life, their productivity, just their ability to go out of the house each day. And they're desperate for tools that help them to either diagnose their condition and understand what is the problem with them, or to manage their condition. Because when you think about it, the gut is basically a 9-metre long tube. And what's going on in the middle of that in particular is largely a mystery. It's a black box. And what this is a tool that can be used to open a window on that black box and shine a light in there. You can come in with an endoscope from either end of the GI tract and understand a little about what's happening. But in terms of what's going on in, say, the small intestine, that is very much a mystery, particularly when it comes to functional analysis. And this is, one of the drawbacks of things like stool sampling and sequencing, is that you can get a certain amount of information about composition, for instance, but that doesn't necessarily tell you much about function. And it certainly doesn't tell you much about what's going on upstream, way up back up in the small intestine. And that's why gastroenterologists and clinicians are so excited about this, is because it's delivering them a tool and a platform that can open up a window into what is currently, very much unknown, and provide them with really useful information to address an unmet clinical need when it comes to microbiome functional analysis.
So in 10 years' time, what's a perfect world look like to you?
So look, we would love to see this technology become ubiquitous. There is such a need for screening and diagnostic tools when it comes to gastrointestinal disorders, particularly common GI disorders like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or IBS, that there is a place for something like this to be used as widely as possible. So we would love to see it become adopted and to become used as a first line of screening and diagnosis capability for common GI disorders.
Malcolm, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and it's been a fascinating topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Dom.